Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I am Marika Perro, and I am the Arts Development Manager at Accessible Arts. In the spirit of reconciliation, I would like to begin by first acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. For those of you who are new to us, Accessible Arts is New South Wales' peak arts and disability organisation. We work to advance the rights of and opportunities for people with disability or who are deaf to develop and sustain professional careers in the arts and also have equitable access to arts and cultural experiences. It is with great pleasure today that we bring to you a panel of experts to discuss their learnings and experiences when addressing the issues of inclusivity and accessibility of spaces and programs within their organisations. Today, you'll hear from a richly experienced panel that includes Amy Sambrook, the Creative Director of Varuna, the National Writers' House, Tony Dam, Manager of Museum Experience at the Museum of Australian Democracy, Dale Rolfe, Web Content Producer from the Museum of Australian Democracy, and Hanya Radvan, the CEO of Penrith Performing and Visual Arts. Our conversation today will be facilitated by Liz Martin, who is the interim CEO of Accessible Arts, and she's also a very active and passionate leader within the arts and disability community. I hope that you all enjoyed today's conversation, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to pass it over to you now, Liz.
Thanks, Marika, and good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Martin. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for your time. I'd like to jump straight into the conversation and invite all our panelists to turn on your microphones and your cameras. Here they all come. And we're going to start with setting the scene. So panelists, each of your organizations have taken on a great access and inclusion project recently with very specific outcomes and focuses in mind. But I'd like to just get a snapshot of where you were at just before that in terms of access and inclusion and what made you want to take on this next step. Amy, we might start with you. The Varuna National Writers' House in the Blue Mountains initiated a brilliant Writers with Disability residency this year, which was called the Writers' Space Fellowship. What led to this step? Where was Varuna at generally in terms of access and inclusion, and what made Varuna keen to set up the residency?
Thanks, Liz. And just before I start, I just want to also acknowledge that I'm joining this session from Darug and Gundungurra country here in Katoomba. It's great to be here to get to talk about this because really Varuna still got a long way to go, but we've come a long way in a short space of time. So Varuna's a writer's residency, a retreat based here in Katoomba. We also run the Blue Mountains Writers Festival. Varuna has actually operated for 30 years as a writer's residency. So it has a really rich history. And no doubt many writers with disability have come to Varuna over the years, but we didn't necessarily know a lot about the writers and their needs. And we were certainly really aware that because of the physical limitations of a heritage building, that we weren't able to serve everyone. And with a remit to identify and support the best Australian writers, it wasn't okay to keep going down that track without making some significant changes at Varuna. Look, a major thing that really set us on a different track was exploring the options to perhaps make some renovations to the existing building, and that proved to be almost impossible. Certainly financially, it was really, really challenging. But we did manage to secure some funding to actually build a separate, fully accessible writer's studio on site. and that was through grant funding. And then importantly, actually, the last piece of funding we did through a crowdfunding campaign to our alumni network and the broader community, which I think helped us in all sorts of ways and let people kind of be part of Varuna's change and us actually identifying that need. So it kind of started from making some physical changes that happened actually during the first lockdown. We were able to build that building then. And from that flowed a whole sequence of things. So it was setting up our disability inclusivity advisory group, and all of the protocols, procedures around that, and working out that how to pay those people to give us advice, and really making really important connections with Accessible Arts, with Writers Victoria. It all flowed from that point of getting that building and trying to work out how to build those relationships and how to best serve those writers in our community that we hadn't been able to serve before.
Oh, fabulous, Amy. That's a great snapshot of where you were at. Hanya, I'm curious to hear from you. I remember there was a little moment there where we could all hang out. We weren't in lockdown, and Accessible Arts came and did 2 days of walk and talk access audits with you. What led to that decision? Where was your organisation at generally in terms of access and inclusion? And what made you keen to have us come and criticise your space?
I don't think we were keen for the criticism. But look, I think we were a bit complacent. So PPMVA runs 2 sites, the Joan Sutherland Performing Arts Centre, which includes a conservatorium and was developed over 2 stages. So it has plenty of issues as a building anyway. And Penrith Regional Gallery in the Lewis Bequest, which is a heritage site with gardens. So we knew we had issues. But we also had fairly active access activities. So I think we were a bit like, yeah, this is all right, we're not too bad. And frankly, what changed was we had a champion on staff. We finally had somebody who said, you know what, we can be better, and who actually undertook to do the work. And that was amazing, because you need a champion. You really need somebody who, when it gets too hard and people are ignoring them, actually pushes through that barrier and goes, nah, I can organise this. So thank you, Fleur Worlds, you're amazing. And those sites were problematic, and we knew it. And I think we were a bit apprehensive because we didn't really want to know the problems too much, but we felt that unless we understood them better, we couldn't even begin to address them. And we needed a practical starting point. And we thought, well, if we have a practical starting point, if we can understand the issues, then we can prioritise them, and then we can move forward and make changes. So that's what led us to the walk and talk.
Great, thanks, Hanya. And yes, a big shout out to Fleur and changing the world there, Fleur. Good on you. Tony, Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra has taken on it's a pretty big task, creating a disability inclusion action plan. And this DAP will give the organisation a full roadmap of what needs to be done to increase access and inclusion across the whole organisation, including things like physical access, programming, representation, employment opportunities over the next 3 years. But curious to know what led to this decision. Where was MOAD at before?
Thanks, Liz. So I guess just prior to COVID, we were at the point where we knew we needed to have a really comprehensive look at accessing and inclusion again. It had been 5 years since we'd done that thoroughly. So we were beginning to think about how to go about it. There'd been staff changeover, the sort of corporate memory of how the last one had been put together was pretty much gone. And then, of course, like lots of cultural institutions, we've been, really heavily impacted by COVID, long periods of closure, visitor numbers down to 10% of their former selves. So it's a huge kind of opportunity to just stop and think, the whole Build Back Better thing. So in other words, not just do exactly what we were doing before, but before we put anything back, make sure that it kind of stands up to the scrutiny that we want to give it now. The other catalyst was that we've got some quite big projects on at MOAD at the moment in terms of some new major permanent exhibitions, sort of spending the kind of money that our organisation doesn't often have. So we thought it's a great chance to not only do the DAP, but bring it together with some other significant pieces of work, one of which Dale will talk about, but also, the major exhibitions. So we just wanted to think end to end about the visitor journey at MOAD, all of the things that are available and sort of how to bring it together better and freshen it up since the last time we'd really thought about this.
Great, thanks, Tony. And Dale, you've been leading the review of the website and all things digital. What led to the decision there?
Thanks, Liz. So our website is about 10 years old. So this is eons in digital years. And so it's quite outdated, both in its design and the technology that it works on. So we have a lot of ambitions and ideas for content for our audience, which we really struggle to create using the current technology. We also suspected that it probably wasn't as accessible as it could be. And we worked with you to do an audit of the site, which confirmed that for us. So some things like the design of the site doesn't really support a lot of users, but also in the way that we produce a lot of content doesn't factor in accessibility needs. So partly we need to do a bit of a shift internally about the way that we produce content, but also we need to create a platform that can, hold our ambitions to create all sorts of content for lots of people. I think as well with COVID, it sort of also placed a lot of emphasis on how important the digital experience is for the museum and how that allows us to connect with so many more people.
Yeah, fabulous, Dale. Let's look at the actual process of setting these activities up. And I recognise for a lot of you, it's still very much a work in progress. And I think generally we would say that access and inclusion is always a work in progress. This space never stops. We're always learning more and developing more knowledge and more opportunities to increase our access and inclusion. So Amy, what was the process of setting up the Writers' Space Fellowship? What did you find you needed to consider? How did you go about it? Were there tricky elements? What made it easy? What made it hard?
Yeah, we, well, after setting up our advisory panel and also doing our DAP, we had some strategic goals that had come out of that process and some key focus areas that we wanted to achieve. And we had this brand new building. I mean, yes, it was lockdown, but it felt very exciting to be able to launch that building. But we wanted to have, we wanted to launch with some really inclusive programming as well that not only meant that we could have those writers come to Varuna, but that we were kind of just indicating that we were really open to accessible programming. So we came up with a suite of programs that we would like to have done, and it happened that we also got some sort of economic stimulus funding because of the reopening. So those two things came together in this really, really lucky way, and we were able to put together kind of a multifaceted program with things like community workshops in libraries, an online program for young writers with disability, and then the Writers' Space Fellowship itself. And so to get to that point was really the work of lots and lots of consultation with Accessible Arts, and importantly with Writers Victoria, who have done fantastic work and continue to do that in that space. So really lots of conversation and learning, trying to get up to speed as quickly as we could, really. And with the Writers' Space Fellowship, I'll just talk about that one. That program the intent there was to end up with 6 writers in residence at Varuna, and also offer an equivalent online program for 6 writers that they could do from wherever they were. And I think one of the key things in setting it up was to set it up with as much flexibility as possible. And that's something we could definitely do better next time. And there's things that we've learned from the process, but just to build in flexibility and choice, because you can do all of the research and planning, but there's still going to be major variables between participants and their needs, and what people would like to get out of that experience. So we ended up with this hybrid kind of model that was going to go ahead. We ran a competitive selection process where writers with disability could apply and nominate whether they would like the online or an in-person program. We appointed writers with disability to be the assessors for that program as well. And then once we'd actually done that assessment process, there was a lot of conversation with the recipients about their access needs. And I mean, things that I learned through that process were, say for the writers who were to be coming to Varuna in person, we've only got one fully accessible writer's studio. So it was how to have those conversations. My colleague Rebecca Goosen really led this, and how to have conversations with those writers to identify their needs, and then for us to do really simple things like not make assumptions about what's going to work for someone, and just take some photos of the space or explain what we are thinking the experience will be like, and be able to have some really honest conversations with people about what's going to work and what's not going to work. So that was the intention with all of that. Unfortunately, the next lockdown meant that the in-person residency couldn't go ahead. So at the very last minute, we had to pivot the whole thing into an online experience for everyone, which was disappointing, but we did still want to go ahead because there were development opportunities within the program, some money and other kind of mentoring that was involved for those writers. So we didn't want to cancel the whole thing. So yes, we got a bit COVIDed by that, but it was a good experience, a good learning experience to go through that.
Brilliant. And it's such a large residency, isn't it? Like 12 writers with disability participated in that 2-week residency. So it's pretty admirable work, Amy. Thanks for sharing that. Dale, I think you're still very much in the thick of the process of revamping the website. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's going, the approach you've taken so far, what's making it easy, hard, tricky? Thanks, Dale.
Yeah, sure. So yes, we're very much in the middle of the process, so we haven't launched the site yet. The first step for us was really to audit all the content. And as you can imagine, with 10 years of content, there's quite a lot there. I think one of the challenging parts for us is there can be a lot of attachment to legacy content, and obviously a lot of time and effort has been invested in the creation of that content. But in reviewing it, we could see that a lot of it wasn't accessible, and that our visitors weren't necessarily using all of it. So we've gone through a process to really sort of assess it and say, is this stacking up with the needs of our audience now? And does it align with the goals of the museum going forward? We've also worked with an SEO agency and a content agency. We've also conducted audience research to help us make those decisions in a strategic way rather than a gut instinct. I think one of the revealing parts of the process is that often what we think our audience wants isn't necessarily what they're asking for. And it's really important to sort of take a step back and sort of think, okay, this is what I'm assuming, but I need to go out there and engage with them further to understand that better. And we've also found the project initiated a lot of thought about the strategic goals of the museum and our ongoing digital experience. So while we thought we'll get a platform and we'll migrate our content over, it's now become quite a bigger project, because you really have to think about what is the experience that you want to create for your audience going forward, and you're establishing a platform to do that over the next 5 years. So this has led to lots of different tentacles. So thinking about our branding, thinking about the way that we invest in content, you know, the photography and video and transcripts and subtitles. And I think that previously content was probably created quite quickly and with limited budget. And I think going forward, we need to assess actually how much work needs to go into the creation of content for it to be meaningful to our whole audience. So that's the project that we're going through now. But yeah, it's been a really a transformative experience, and I think that it's revealed a lot of really exciting opportunities for the museum.
Great, thanks, Dale. And it's interesting, isn't it? I think a lot of people presume, well, we automatically can think about website access as being the techie kind of stuff, like your color contrast and the fonts that you're using and the layout, all the cogs behind the website, rather than the content. And it's the content that can really be a little bit of a challenge, I guess, about how we approach that.
Yeah, I think the great thing about the content is that it is so in your hands right now. We can immediately make changes that have an impact. So that's a really positive part of that process. So that's exciting, that knowing that we can make some changes even when the platform hasn't launched.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Thanks, Dale. Tony, you're still also in the process of developing the Disability Inclusion Action Plan. What have been some of the steps that you've taken, and what have you learned so far? Have there been any easy implementations, anything tricky that you can share with us?
I guess if I had to sum it up in a few words, I'd say that the DAP process this year for the staff at the museum has been a bit of a shock and awe process. Because as I mentioned, we hadn't been thinking enough about it or holistically enough about it. And then we just absolutely threw pretty much everything into it for a couple of months, particularly. So working with Accessible Arts, we have worked through a research phase and are now in a development phase. The research phase consisted of 4 parts. So there was a survey of our visitors and staff on access and inclusion issues. We did a review of a sample of 10 different documents from all kind of aspects of MOAD's operations, everything from how we evacuate visitors if there's a fire alarm, or through to our volunteering policy, and sort of the full range of what you can imagine. We did a review of our earlier disability action plan, and we also had a team of disability advisors come and do a walk and talk audit for half a day, or a bit over half a day, which was incredibly helpful. In terms of what we learned from all of that, sort of too much to sort of summarise quickly, but a few things are that, interestingly, our visitors with disability tended to be kinder about our shortcomings than our own staff. And you'd think, you know, would it be the other way around? You think that the staff would go, we're fine, you know, nothing to see here. And the visitors would go, this is simply not good enough. But in fact, it was the reverse. The visitors were incredibly kind, and the staff were going, oh, look, there's just so much more we can do. So that was actually, it's good to have it that way around, because hopefully the visitors will be pleasantly surprised when things do improve, and the staff will feel that by being honest and indicating that they're committed, that's actually made a difference to the whole process as well. We did learn, of course, also that some of our documents, which have been written over, you know, a big span of years, they reflect, you know, outdated model and language around disability. And so as we work our way through rewriting things, we'll be kind of resetting minds, I guess, as well as resetting the documents. And I guess, yeah, if I had to pick just to do one of those things, though, of the 4, I think the walk and talk audit is the most powerful, because it really does just make you see things from quite a different angle, and some cases literally, you know, in terms of the heights of things and all of that sort of stuff, which on some level as museum practitioners we all know, but it's just been patchily implemented over the years, depending on, you know, who the curator was, who was doing this, that and the other on a particular project at a point in time. So it's just lifting the game across the board. So we're now in the development phase. There's more shock and awe with, you know, multiple meetings with senior managers and sort of every kind of team in the museum. But I think what was particularly interesting too was the focus groups. So we had an internal focus group, which was essentially a way for any member of staff at the museum who was interested in this and wanted to have a say, they had a say. And I think you mentioned, Liz, that was probably one of the standout meetings from the entire process, because they just spotted things that we spotted. And the external focus group brought us into contact with museum goers with disability who we've not met before, and to have them all together as a group mulling over things was also incredibly helpful. So yes, we're in the final sort of writing up stages, and then we're expecting to have it approved and be into implementation by the end of the year. And yeah, we've learned a great deal more than that, but that's, I guess, what I can say for now.
Thanks, Tony. And both you and Dale have mentioned the importance of that conversation between your visitors, be it online or in person, and staff or the organisation, and be that conversation through surveys or focus groups or through an advisory panel, just the importance of keeping those conversations open. And it's very easy for us to make presumptions or think that we know we're on the right track, but having those open conversations can often be surprising and put us back on the right track as we go along. Now, Tony, you mentioned a walk and talk. Hanya, you had 2 half days of walk and talks across your venues. How did that work? What did you learn? What was helpful? Has it led to any changes so far? Very curious.
I think organising the walk and talks was the hardest for us internally, not about accessible arts, just working out who needed to be there. In other words, who we thought actually needed to hear what was going to be said, as well as who wanted to be there, and then limiting the numbers so it was manageable, and then actually doing the practical things of making sure accessible arts and our staff were there at the same time. It was like herding kittens for poor Fleur. So there was a point when we didn't think it could happen. But when we did it, I think staff were fairly apprehensive because we operate our premises, we don't own them. So sometimes the infrastructure, the building challenges can be beyond our control, or something we need to lobby council to improve and change. And I think we were scared of being wrong, but the team from Accessible Arts were just really fantastic and very friendly and so practical and non-judgmental that I think everyone relaxed straight away, and it became very much a partnership. And I learned things about our staff that, you know, I didn't know about in terms of their skills and their abilities as well. And the best thing, I think, was the diversity of experiences from the walk and talk. So the group that came out to both sites was really diverse, and we got lots of fresh perspectives. And it was seeing both sites and venues from fresh eyes. There were so many things that we hadn't thought of, so many things that I hadn't noticed, and I've been in the job 8 years, and I had never noticed that we had all the visual evacuation signals at the Joan and none at all at the gallery site. And it's kind of like, it's so obvious, it should be in your face, but we just hadn't seen it until the walk and talk. And so it was fantastic just to get a log of all of those things and could get that list and go, yeah, we can start changing this. So we have started, but it's, yeah, it'll be a long process, but it makes it much easier for us to list everything and start working through everything that was raised.
And they're because I was lucky enough to be part of the team for those walk and talks. Yeah. And they're always really exciting opportunities for me too to keep learning, because you're moving through these spaces with a group of advisors with all different types of lived experience. And your understanding and depth of knowledge about how different people interact with the world, and how we are all different in how we like to take in information or experience different spaces. And it really highlights to me that access and inclusion is always a team effort.
Yeah.
That we can't do it alone. It's really about community, a community of different experiences, and having those voices come out so that we can learn and implement better practices for more people to be able to access our venues and our programs. It was wonderful. If any of you out in the audience land, hello, if you have questions you'd like to ask, please feel free to throw some in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen there. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, I have some more questions. I'm thinking tips and tricks. So any practical tips that you could each give to our audience? You know, if we have organizations in the audience that are looking at taking on similar activities or approaches, are there any tips you could share? Amy, we might flick over to you. Any suggestions for organizations looking to develop a residency or program specifically for artists with disability?
Yeah, look, I'd definitely start by acknowledging Accessible Arts gave us really, really practical help. So we engaged Accessible Arts to do a website audit for us, to give us really specific advice about the program guidelines we were putting out about the fellowship, about our forms, so the actual application forms, and as well the promotion, so advice about all of that, and potential networks for getting the word out. So in terms of that practical support, yeah, I'd really say thank you to Accessible Arts for all of that, and it just gave us a lot of confidence to go ahead with the program. I think, like I said before, that I think my main thing is just this idea of flexibility. So to build in as much flexibility as possible, to not make assumptions where possible, to build in choice for how participants might wish to engage. In our context, I think it's also to, and we could definitely do better with this, is to communicate our expectations of what we hope people to get out of the program, or what their time commitment might be, or which of the online sessions we feel might be, you know, more important than others, or that kind of thing. But also to communicate that it is, you know, one experience in life, and there's a whole lot of well-being things that are worth saying, I suppose, around a program that can, in our context, for something to be an intensive, where it's a 2-week intensive to focus on your creative work. A whole lot of other life things can be triggered by that, or you can be managing many things. And certainly we've had to run this program while our participants were homeschooling and doing other things as well. So it was to try and take pressure off the participants and give them as much agency in that experience as possible. And yeah, I think also a really practical thing is to build in a rigorous feedback process at the end of the experience. I mean, there's obviously opportunities to check in with people throughout, and for us, we did do that, you know, in a group setting, but also where we wanted to check in with someone, we'd, you know, make the phone call and just have a half an hour chat about the experience, or what's going on, what that person's getting out of the online residency. So there was those informal opportunities throughout, and then a rigorous survey-based feedback process at the end. And I think basic things for us that we've really improved on it, things like making sure that we are asking people's access requirements, not just in that program, but in all of our programs, and making sure that we've got a dedicated accessibility page on our website, that we've got detailed information about the Varuna House and access, things like that. So just really being clear about information, expectations, and being flexible. I think that'd be my tips.
And the flexibility is really important. And also your comment there about the learnings that you've transferred across to other programs and starting to check in with everyone about access requirements in any of your residencies. All of that is fantastic to see, because I guess all of this knowledge is transferable, and not just for specific disability focused projects or residencies. That's great. Thanks, Amy. Dale, what tips can you suggest for organisations looking to revamp their website?
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, it's to build a culture of considering accessibility at the beginning of developing anything that you're going to publish. I think typically accessibility is considered at the end of a project and sort of can be tacked on. And it's really important that accessibility is baked into the process from the beginning. I think the principles of good accessible content are the principles for good content in general. Things like writing in plain English, having a structure to your pages, you know, producing subtitles and transcripts for videos and audio files, using a diverse and inclusive range of people in your imagery is really important as well. And things like even like your graphic design elements, if you're going to create an image that has text on it, have you got a version of that people can access if they can't read that? I think as well, it's really important to think about accessibility digitally, not in the most conventional way. So it's important to think that perhaps someone who doesn't have great internet access probably can't have a site that's going to load lots of heavy imagery. Someone might be accessing your website on their mobile, on a bus. You know, they might have a broken arm, they might be having a migraine. Like, there's a lot of different experiences that people have, and it's really important for you to create a site or any digital content that is flexible, going back to Amy's point, that allows people to access your content in the way that's right for them. So I think it's really important to think about that from the beginning. So to that end, we're trying to create like guidelines and a sort of a checklist that people, all the content creators in our museum, need to follow before they publish anything, and creating a standard that we all adhere to. And again, we also did the website audit, which was incredibly useful for us just to highlight things that we weren't aware of, and you know, it allows us to think about these things when we're creating the design of the site. And yeah, that kind of practical advice is so helpful. I also did some of the online courses with you, which gave me so much insight into just lots of different needs of people, and just having that information was so helpful. And yeah, it's just allowed us to think just more dynamically about the content we create.
And it is that two-tiered sort of approach, isn't it? Like building awareness within the team, and also having some really practical steps, checklists, processes that make it easy for everyone to follow and not forget all the elements that need to be included.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we want to make, I think having a set of guidelines and a standard makes it really helpful, because normally you'll have multiple content creators in an organisation. And so this just makes it really simple for people to create what they need to for their audiences that meets the requirements for all the audiences.
Fabulous. Thanks, Dale. And I really like your example too of there is a saying in the community that if you get it right for people with disability, you get it right for everyone. And that thing of, you know, if you get your website right, then you're also a person with a migraine on a bus with a broken arm. We'll give them all the things. So it's really about increasing access for everyone. Tony, what about you? Any suggestions, tips, tricks for organisations looking to develop a disability inclusion action plan?
So I strongly agree that Accessible Arts is a fantastic partner to step you through, any organisation through the process, because it is quite a complex thing to look at pretty much everything the organisation does, and it's would be easy to get submerged and not come back out in terms of trying to think about so many things at once. So working with people who do this all the time is a huge help. I think too that really it's you need to sort of allow 6 months from when you sort of embark on the process to you're at a point to say, yep, we're all signing up to this and it's formally approved, and now we're going to get stuck in and implement it. But even ahead of that final document, you find that the cultural change already starts to happen. So we're already doing things in terms of one of our most popular exhibitions, the Political Cartoons exhibition, that can be done right now, even ahead of final agreement on everything. And I think the other thing to think about is the set of people you need once you have got your plan. In other words, what your disability reference group model is going to be. Like, one of the things that we've learned is that the model of a disability reference group that we had last time doesn't really work now. And so we've learned some things, and I hope we'll be in a better position to do that better going forward.
Great, thanks, Tony. Hanya, over to you. What tips can you suggest for organisations looking to conduct a walk and talk access audit tour? Yes, what can you tell us?
I talked earlier about how difficult, one of the difficulties was organising who was going to be there from internally. I'd say have as many people there as possible, because whilst the report at the end of the walk and talk is fantastic as a record, I think the experience for everyone who participated was extraordinary, because we actually were exposed to so many different perspectives and viewpoints on our facilities and the experiences we offer during that process, that I think it was a very tangible and moving, actually, and elucidating. I mean, I had no idea that we were more accessible backstage for artists than we were for audiences. But that's a silly little aside. But I think that actually we learned so much, including the mistakes we'd made. And I think the second one is don't give up. We feel like we're very much at the beginning of a process, and we're going to keep chipping away. And I think Tony mentioned about the cultural change. I can already see that we've got more than one champion now. We've got other champions within the organisation, and that came as a direct result of that walk and talk and being made aware of issues. And I also think for arts organisations or cultural organisations like us, it's probably really useful to keep your creative part of your brain alive, because some of the perspectives we were given on the walk and talk weren't, oh, that's just too hard, knock it down, start again. They were really kind of, oh, well, you can't do that, but you could do this. And they were kind of left field solutions, and they were always about what you could do rather than what you couldn't. And I think we'd parked that part of our brains when looking at access. And I think it's a really important part of the brain to actually have working when you're looking at how you might do things better.
And it is the arts, isn't it?
And it is the arts.
We're very creative.
Exactly. One more thing, which is really practical and non-artistic, is make a plan of your priorities and put some easy wins up first, so you feel like you've achieved something. So I think that actually gets you further along, because you can go, yeah, we did that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I imagine that when you and your staff are in those spaces all the time, it's very easy to get used to you know, your own space and not see things anymore.
Yeah.
And then you have a team of advisors come through and suddenly you start looking at the space differently.
Yeah, completely, with completely fresh eyes. Of course, since we did the walk and talk, we haven't seen the spaces at all.
Well, you've got the report.
Well, we got the report, we remember them. And so there is that too.
Thanks, Anya. That's super helpful. Now, we do have a question that's come through from our wonderful friend and CEO of Arts Access Australia, Matthew Hall. And he says, congratulations to all of you in starting the important journey of being more inclusive in your programs and organisations. Physical and digital access is very important, but there are other critical parts of developing a fully accessible program and organisation. I'm keen to hear your plans for embedding disability-led practice and in ensuring equitable and accessible career pathways and professional development for artists and arts workers with disability in your organisations. Give you a moment to have a think about that. Tony, you've turned your mic on. Does that mean you're ready? Is that like a buzzer hit?
Well, all I would say, we've still got a long way to go. We've still got to think a lot of things through. But one of the aha moments for me was I had thought quite a lot about, for example, our core tours, even like our after dark experiences and that sort of thing, as more of a kind of taking what we've got and translating it for different audiences in different ways. But through the DAP process, I've very much started to think of it more in terms of not necessarily doing the same thing differently, but co-creating different experiences from the ground up. And so that's one of the things that we'll be looking at. We don't work with artists in quite the same way because we're, I guess, a political history and political practice museum, I guess, but that doesn't mean that there's not loads of opportunities to think about that aspect.
Great, thanks, Tony. Amy.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I'd say we also have a long way to go there. Having said that, I think what's exciting for us is that we often we've got this amazing alumni network of 30 years worth of writers who have come through our programs. So by making shifts in who we can welcome to Varuna and to our programs, we're changing that network, and it's through that network that we're looking for people like program assessors, workshop facilitators, festival presenters. So I can see that over time it will become more of a rich experience and opportunity for those alumni that come through the accessible, so the writer space type programs or other programs. So that partially answers your question, I think. And I think we're also hoping to appoint someone to our board of directors who has lived experience of disability and is happy to be there in that capacity. So yeah, so I think there's a way to go, but we are cognizant of those things too.
Fantastic, thanks, Amy. And Hanya, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, good, thanks. I think we're really at the very beginning of that journey. I've just been looking at the question. I've been thinking about artists we've worked with and continue to work with who do live with a disability, but I'd say that it's been very ad hoc and project-based, and that we haven't done the work to actually think about it as an embedded program across our programs. But it's something we want to do and something that we need to do. But at the moment, I've still got 2 key artistic director positions to fill, etc., and a lot of change within the organisation. So it's something that I need to build in and make sure that we continue to do the thinking about. So it stops being ad hoc and project-based and occasional, but actually systematic. But good question.
Yeah, great question. And it really does make a difference. We see it time and time again, like once you start having people on your staff with people with disability, or the board, or creative producers involved, then the shifts can really start happening at a rapid pace. Fantastic, thank you. We just have a few more minutes left, and I'm keen to know where you're going to from here. So let's think short-term, medium-term, long-term goals. Where to from here? Hanya, what improvements do you intend on delivering in the short, medium, and long term?
In the short term, I suppose lockdown interrupted us, and who knew that it was so frantic to actually run closed venues, but it was crazy. But the team have been working through some of the recommendations at the gallery and are looking really hard, because there is a local group, No Boundaries group, that we want to have on site and working regularly and be the home for from next year. So they've actually identified and some of the key recommendations that we need to have on site to make that possible, and have got a partnership with council and money from council to make that happen. And then they have a longer term plan to actually seek creative capital money or council money to fund greater changes on site. So that's in terms of infrastructure, but having a group on site regularly and being host to them also means that it'll start to change and broaden the programming. And I think that's really important. At the Joan, we've got 2 infrastructure projects. One is actually building a cafe in the foyer. So having that access audit, having shared it with council, actually gives us things to think about in that process, including, you know, table design and chairs and signage, and make sure that they are better than they would have been otherwise. You know, I feel a bit embarrassed that, you know, we had a whole bar refurbished and it was really pathetic from an access point of view, and it's done. And that's like, oh, I wish we'd done it a year earlier so that we could have factored some better access into that bar. And we've just applied for a grant to actually undertake a big change in the Q Theatre and change all the seats, because they are really difficult, and access within rows is really difficult. And I don't think we quite realised how tricky that venue was until the access audit. So if we get that money, that will absolutely make a fundamental change. So I suppose our heads at the moment were very much in the short term about making physical improvements to our spaces. But that's partly because our programs were on hold. The other thing is that we're also thinking about constantly having a digital program, because we recognize that physical access remains difficult for people. And so we're looking for ways to have that as an ongoing part of what we do to address that. And then we really need to we need to implement a disability action improvement plan as well. We need to do it as well. We need to work with council. They're doing theirs. We'll work with them on theirs and then onto ours. So it's actually embedding it in our forward thinking and strategic planning as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Hanya. Tony, where to from here?
So I'll be fairly brief, but essentially there is quite a few things we can do quite quickly. So obviously programming can be modified reasonably quickly, just thinking about our overall offer in terms of tours and other experiences, and making sure that we're creating a diverse enough mix of experiences. One of the things I'm keen to look at really quickly is finding a quiet space on the main floor of the museum, because we are a really busy place. When things are in full swing, we have 16 schools a day going through, as well as obviously a couple of 100,000 visitors through each year. And so it is actually quite an important thing to have a place to withdraw if you need to withdraw, which we don't really currently have. The exhibitions which are being developed will also benefit from the advice sort of immediately that are already benefiting. So that's great. The slightly harder, longer term things, but incredibly important, is just the whole visitor flows around the building, including our kind of seminal issue, which is that we should have one way in for absolutely everybody. And we're already, we've moved to do something a bit interesting that's different than what we have been doing, which will probably be a temporary option, but we've got our eye on the prize in terms of that bigger, grander single entrance down the track, if we can possibly swing that. So.
Fabulous. Thanks, Tony. Amy, over to you. what are you looking forward to moving on to in the future?
Well, firstly, it's finding some extra money to make sure that we can do the programs again next year. So that's the Writers' Space Fellowship. It will go ahead in some form, but we were able to do it for 12 writers this year, and that's just not a scale that we can do without finding extra project funding. So we're looking for that. I think for us, something that we are focused on is finding ways to acknowledge and support hidden disabilities and mental health disabilities as well, and how best to equip our staff and contract staff we might be working with to deliver programs to support those writers, and maybe to look for external support and training there. I think for us, a big shift is that we see the online programs as totally core now, that they won't go away. So right throughout the year, we'll be running online programs, which is a huge mental leap for like a writer's residency in a house in the mountains to then be thinking that that's totally core programming. So that will be going ahead. And a major challenge is our Blue Mountains Writers Festival and all the access needs around that in like historic venues and buildings like the Carrington Hotel. If anyone's been to that, it's that there are and all the little quirky spots around Katoomba. How do we make the festival work in an accessible way when it can go ahead in person, hopefully next year?
Fabulous. Thanks, Amy. And Dale, any tips? What are you moving forward to?
Yeah, so in the short term, before the new website launches, our focus is on creating whatever content we publish, making sure it's accessible. So just implementing that best practice guide to help as many content creators across the museum. I think we're also expanding some of our digital offerings. So we're creating audio description tour, which will be the first one we've had, which will be great. And also our goal is to increase the variety of contributors that we have to our editorial content and making sure that we've got a lot of different voices coming through. And then when we launch the site, the goal is that it's easy to read, accessible for everyone, and really tells the story of the museum in a meaningful way. With that platform in place, that will just be the jumping off point for so many digital opportunities for us, and creating a really dynamic online program and digital experiences that can be really meaningful to our audience, whether they come to the museum and visit in person or whether they'll never be able to visit us, but they can have that experience from their homes.
Fabulous. Thanks, Dale. Thank you all for your time this morning. We are pretty much on almost there at 12 o'clock. I do really believe that access and inclusion is a very collaborative process that works best when we work together. And so moments like this where we can share what we've learnt are really important for all of us. So thanks very much for sharing the process and sharing your plans. We really appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for your questions. I think you'll be getting some answers coming through now if you haven't as of yet. We're typing some responses to some of those questions. And we'll cross over live now to Marika Perot.
Hello again. So yeah, I would just like to reiterate what Liz said. I'd like to thank our panelists today for being so generous with their time, and this forum of sharing of knowledge is so important when we're talking about access and inclusivity. I'd also like to really thank our audience and the participants who have all tuned in today to be a part of this conversation. And if there are any questions or comments or follow-up ideas that come as a result of this conversation, please feel free to reach out to us at Accessible Arts. You can contact us on our website, aarts.net.au, or you can also reach out via email at info@aarts.net.au, and we would love to hear from you and to continue this conversation. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.